Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the online book launch of Minority Media and Participation in Hong Kong, Creative and Tactical Belonging, co-organized by the Center for Cultural Research and Development at Leung University and the Inter-Asia Cultural Studies Society. So we're very delighted to have the author of the book, Dr. Lisa Leung, who is also the Associate Director of the Center, as well as Dr. Frank Martin, the Associate Professor in Culture and Communication from the University of Melbourne, joining us as a respondent. So today's section will start with an introduction by Lisa and a conversation between Frank and Lisa, followed by a 30 to 40 minutes of Q&A section. The chat room will be open throughout the section. So if you would like to post your comments or questions in the chat box, please feel free to do so. Or when we open for the Q&A, you are welcome to speak up by pressing the raise hand button and we will unmute you. So let's turn the mic over to you, Lisa.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm really thrilled to have all of you here to join me to celebrate my book and to spend the next hour and a half here. I guess I have to confess that this book was published actually last year. So as you know, just things happened, and then that's why I'm so very grateful for the organizers, the IACS, Inter-Asia Cultural Studies, and also here at the Cultural Studies Department in Leung University, the CCRD, Center for Cultural Research and Development, and of course Holly for organizing this and then the promotion. But most of all, thanks Fran. Yes, Dr. Fran Martin for agreeing to be my discussant and to accompany me on this this journey of book launch. So I think what I do is to first provide a brief synopsis of the book. I mean, of course, you can read from the poster, the official synopsis, but I thought, I would give a brief introduction as well as a few takeaway points so that, we could, start the discussion later on. And then Fran will, open up the discussion by raising a few questions. And then hopefully we can, continue on a kind of a dialogue mode. Because I think ultimately, both Fran and I wanted to pitch this talk not just to celebrate the book per se, but also to highlight some points from the book which might perhaps connect with all of us here. In other words, we would really hope to hear your comments and questions as we go along. So feel free to raise your hand, just chip in at the chat room, and if you want to say something. Okay. So I guess I'll just try to, read from my script here. This book is the crystallization of findings from a research grant I got in 2019, which tried to explore the complex and diverse engagement of migrant or ethnic minority youth, and in this case, mainly South Asian youth, in Hong Kong, and their nuanced struggles, recognition, and belonging. So the book, as it is a culmination of the findings of my research journey, which, actually, amazingly started off some 10 years ago, with me asking a simple question: why are most South Asians in Hong Kong, still in the slowest ebb of society, despite the fact that some of their ancestors have been here in Hong Kong for centuries? This research became a fascinating but humbling journey, which took me to different sites of others, experiencing diverse sights, sounds, and smell, and beliefs and lifestyle. Most of all, I have continuously been impressed by the amazing talents, energy, and determination that my informants displayed, where I'm confirmed that where there's a will, there's a way. So this book, as it now stands, is an extension of an earlier book that I co-authored with Professor John Ernie, I believe he's here. Hi, John. By focusing on the agency, creative means of participation of ethno-racial minority youth, as well as the nuanced tensions of the ethnic minority communities as they struggle to voice out against the mainstream, but also desire to belong. The 4 stories that I included in this book of ethnic minority youth groups are not just celebration of their talents, but also their struggle to be recognized as a Hong Konger. In the end, it's not just about their stories alone. I think the stories connect with stories of survival of many ethnic minority communities who once as migrants find themselves othered in places they call home, in various pockets of Asia and beyond. I hope that through these stories, I can also contribute to the new ways of and reflecting on the timely theme of intercultural citizenship in the increasingly complex migratory flows in Asia. So I'll just raise a few, takeaway points here. First, the book discusses minorities as not only a demographic or cultural entity, but also as a method of critical inquiry that is related to subjecthood and subjectivity, so that the position of minority subjectivity allows us an alternative way of seeing from those discursively told by dominant majority. Second, from this, minority as critical inquiry, how it informs most narratives of intervention. And in this book, I'll, of this notion of participation. So I did a historical review of the minoritization of South Asians in Hong Kong. I attempted to outline the struggles of these ethno-racial minorities amidst the changing political governance on the one hand, and the nuanced ethno-racial politics in the process on the other. I borrowed the notion of participation, but extended and situated in the context of ethnic minority engagement. I offered the term participation as a frame of the kind of intervention they are involved in, and belonging as possible goals of this intervention. In the social media era, I argued also that media definitely plays a central role in this minority participation. Looking back, this book became a somewhat accidental documentation of a particular historical, political, and cultural juncture in Hong Kong, where ethno-racial struggle intertwines with the democratic political struggle. And when South Asian Hong Kongers increasingly identify themselves as Hong Kongers. The struggle for recognition and belonging of these racial communities joined hearts with Chinese Hong Kongers in our fight for democracy and civil society. Last but not least, I wish to dedicate this book to all those I have interviewed and come across throughout this amazing journey, all those brave souls who have struggle to survive, to find a better life, to find a voice, and to be included. And because of that, display the vibes and the energy to be and to belong. As Hong Kong is increasingly minoritized, I hope this book helps to bear witness, but also to convey hope to all those who are in similar struggles. Where there is opportunity, there is hope. And let's hope for more opportunities. So I now pass the time to Fran with her very challenging questions too.
Thanks, Lisa. And I want to start off also by, thanking you for inviting me to help celebrate and discuss this remarkable book. And actually, before I get into my questions, I want to just make a few points about what I think is so fascinating and exciting about this work, or some of the things. I can't possibly encapsulate them all because there's too many, there's too much to say, but I've tried to just pick out a few. The first one, like as an outsider, obviously, to Hong Kong, I don't live there, I've never lived there, I've passed through Hong Kong often, I have lots of Hong Kong friends and colleagues. But what stood out to me from my perspective initially was the historical specificity of this very perverse situation that South Asian heritage residents of Hong Kong are in the sense that, as you touched on briefly a moment ago, they're so deeply embedded in the city through generations of ancestors, literally, with forebears who first arrived as part of the British colonial administration. So their position is kind of very complexly post-colonial. Often, as you point out, in the book, they have longer local histories in Hong Kong and claims to historical belonging than many ethnically Chinese residents. And yet they're still persistently racialized, othered, and marginalized by the Chinese centrism of the governing regimes. So if we were to think about this in a messy and maybe not very appropriate comparison, even say with Singapore, where the official form of belonging that non-Chinese residents in that Chinese majority city-state have, it's so much worse for the South Asian heritage residents of Hong Kong. So that's just a particularly perverse historical and cultural situation that the book addresses so sensitively and so interestingly through the mechanisms of media and culture and participation. The second thing that stands out to me is the way that the book really from the outset is very committed to centering these minority subjects and others as active and creative agents of culture, right? So despite their own minoritization, they somehow manage to be active and creative and have agency in their cultural production, whether that's social media or public service radio or ethno stand-up comedy, a great portmanteau term, or community fashion practice. The book really is very resolute, and I think you, Lisa, have been very resolute, rightly so, in refusing to collude in their minoritization, right, by the mainstream culture. You never frame them as victims or as a social problem, but always as agents. And that's, of course, an important kind of political statement. It's also a very cultural studies kind of way to approach a situation and a cultural scene. Third is, I was going to talk here about the intellectual engagement of the work, which I could talk about for a long time, but I think we'll get to that in questions. So I won't sort of try to summarize it because there's too much there. What I want to finally here just draw attention to is, in reading this book, it's one of those books that's such a pleasure to read because you can hear the energy and the delight of the author when you're engaging with the scenes and practices that are studied, right? So there's a kind of joyful energy that invigorates the writing. You can feel the excitement about these scenes. You can feel the empathic engagement and deep respect for the people who are interviewed and the cultures that they co-create. And I think you can also feel the kind of mutually transforming and transformative character of that engagement. So it's not simply a scholar writing about something out there. It's kind of participatory in a different way, such that the author is herself being transformed by the process, which I hope we can hear more about in a moment. So overall, the book, to me, what it gives me is the sense of this vast reservoir of kind of pent up cultural energy. It's like it's underneath Hong Kong almost. It's pent up beneath the mainstream Hong Kong culture, the Chinese-centric culture, but it springs forth all over the place in the manner of, I want to say, volcanic geysers. I don't know, wouldn't that just be a volcano? I can't think of the right metaphor, but these kind of flaming shoots come up through the cracks. And you've tapped into this energy, and the book brings us that energy. It infuses and enlivens the book from the first to the last page. So I just had to say those things about how much I love the book before I start asking you questions. So thanks for bearing with me there. My first question, though, to move on, is actually about the genesis of the book and also about how it intersects with your sense of your own positionality in Hong Kong. So as you noted a moment ago in your introduction, this book does extend and deepen research that was already begun in your earlier book with John Ernie, Understanding South Asian Minorities in Hong Kong. And it's a topic that's evidently interested you for a while. I'd love to begin at the beginning and to ask you not only to tell us a little bit more about the detail of how you got interested in this topic of ethnic minorities in Hong Kong, but also how does this research interest connect with your own life and your own identity as a Chinese heritage academic living and working in Hong Kong?
Well, thank you, Fran. That's really flattering. But well, I really do. That's why I like you so much. Your vibes, your energy. Yeah, I think I mean, like the work that we do, right? We often, for whatever reasons, of course, for contract renewal reasons, we have to. Okay, what should be my next research? I need to apply for a grant. I need to publish, and but I guess at the end of the day, I think a book should be about what you're passionate about, and most of all, I think it relates to some parts of you, as a researcher, as an academic. So I mean, okay, I'll go to that part. Yeah, that's what I find accidental. Like, okay, back in 2008 and 9, I think it was, of course, I have to thank John here that we were just talking about, things, and then we got to talk about, ethnic minorities in Hong Kong. I guess, that was also the time when, the government was still inching its way, like, should I not, stipulate the racial discrimination bill in Hong Kong? And I think that's what got us to talk about, why it took us so long, to even think about, start thinking about this bill. And I think, that's just what got us to think, whoa, if we look at, sort of relevant literature or research, we couldn't find any, literally none. And so I think, that's kind of what started us to like, why don't we do a research on that? And I think years later, I just thought, that really sort of connects with, of course, cultural studies, the way we look at the problem, the way we look at how these ethnic minorities have been minoritized, marginalized, but also I think it also relates with my other work, my connection with social advocacy groups and human rights groups. And I think, it definitely is about, racial injustice here. That's why that's what got us to start working on the project. And this current book is an extension of the last book, which was titled Understanding South Asian Minorities in Hong Kong. So I thought, well, we'll have to up it, to actually extend it further, to actually really think about and try to think about cases and stories that could actually help us think about and demonstrate the kind of critical agency or creative agency of these ethnic minority youth groups. And I think, as we, as the research progressed, we did see more and more people started to think about and talk about racial discrimination. And then I think these second and third generation South Asian youth, have, some of them have started to, emerge in public life. And indeed, in my book, it actually archives, some of these, names and faces of South Asian minority youth. And so I think, it's the kind of, interaction and dialogue between research and social reality that, is what got this book to come about. But then, so just kind of years later, when I think back, this process has got me to think about, of course, I kept on being asked this question, why, you're Chinese, right? Why are you so interested, and why are you so concerned about, South Asians in Hong Kong? And I thought to myself, hey, that really, sort of rings a bell, because I think it really touches on some parts of my past that actually comes back, comes back on the call, because I think, growing up, I've been sometimes, looked on as an ethnic minority, because I think those who know me, would see that, I've got a darker skin than a lot of Chinese. And yeah, and growing up, sometimes, you just kind of, you just recognize that people look on you with a different look, like they kind of size you up and then like, kind of distance themselves. And then, of course, there have been a couple of times, that I've been, taken as a Filipina, and of course, a Filipino domestic helper. And so I think, in my growing up, in my childhood, I probably, sort of have harbored such a kind of, frustration. Like, why am I, why do I get this look? Why do I get this kind of attitude, even among, my own kind? And I think, that's that might have nurtured my kind of the sentiments that pushed me, to actually empathize with, South Asian groups in Hong Kong. And maybe that also informs me about, the problems of injustice and inequality. And that also informed my, involvement in social advocacy group. Yeah, so I guess, I'll stop here. If people want to know more nitty-gritties, I'll be happy to share.
Thanks, Lisa. What a fascinating backstory. I've never heard you tell that story. That's really interesting.
I actually included it in my I think in the introduction or the acknowledgement in the first book, not this book.
Right.
Yeah,
I missed it.
Yeah.
It's good to have the.
We can certainly talk about it.
Yeah, it's good to have the live version anyway. That's great. Someone was just asking about when to ask questions. We can either put them in the chat, as Holly said before, or save them up and ask them live after this discussion that we're having now. So I'm going to move on to my next question, which gets into some of the conceptual material in the book, the conceptual frameworks and the concepts and theories that you develop afresh through the research. So a key concept in the book is this notion that you are developing through the case studies of minority belonging, so belonging. And I find that a really fascinating and quite a moving concept, also very linguistically ingenious, because it captures the ambivalence of the minority subject's affective attachment to a city and a society that relentlessly excludes them. That tension between the desire to belong and moments of feeling at home, as well one might feel at home in one's home city, but then on the other side, the perverse experience of being excluded from one's home city. So I'd like to ask you to speak a bit about this concept of minority belonging. How did you think of the concept? Where did it come from in the fieldwork initially? And how would you define it succinctly for us? And also, where do we see it most sharply illustrated, do you think, in the many examples in the book?
Right. Science, that's a big question. I guess, that really sort of highlights the important thing I want to bring up, from this book. And I think I kind of mentioned in the synopsis, I would situate the notion of belonging as one of the probably the possible outcomes or goals of the other concept, participation. And some here and there in the book I call it sort of tactical participation. And maybe I'll start unpacking this word term participation before I move on to belonging. And I think participation is a general word, and I'm not the inventor of this word or this notion. So, I mean, you know, in the broad sense, you know, participation is, you know, to quote from in John's foreword, to share, to impart, and partake, to take part, right? You know, that's the most general, you know, sort of a meaning of that term. But then, you know, by the way, in political science and social sciences context, you know, participation refers to political participation, political engagement, and social engagement, to refer to the increasing, of course, engagement in public life of probably, you know, citizens, you know, with the hope of, you know, of course, a better society, whatever. And I think in recent scholarship, and to quote from, to borrow from Nicole Carpentier's famous book on participation, it's to actually to articulate the impact of media, you know, in publicizing, in problematizing this form of, you know, political and social participation by engaging media. So, in other words, of course, you know, how participation is mediated, and likewise, you know, how it's you know, further, you know, democratized even, right, when everyone, you know, can be the media. So mediated participation is definitely, you know, the kind of concept that is also widely used to denote the increasing, you know, globalized movements and social actions. And I think, you know, and of course here, you know, because of that, a lot of people started to revive the Habermasian notion of, you know, participatory or participatory democracy, so that, you know, this kind of, you know, participation has got a democratic kind of goal to realize the kind of genuine democracy from below. So, you know, I'm kind of, you know, sort of boring all this, but I guess the central element of what I want to bring out in participation is that, you know, this drive, you know, or this globalized social movement, as, you know, sort of demonstrated by globalized social movements, is that there has to be some elements of subversion from below, right? You know, because, you know, as we can see from Occupy Central, the 1 versus 99, you know, there's an increasing frustration against, you know, increasing neoliberalization, neoliberalized practices, and that's also why, you know, more and more people are engaging in this sort of mediated participation to show their frustration, but also to sort of try to aim for, you know, a more democratic or more genuine, you know, democratic participation. And so I think, you know, that forms the backbone of my idea of minority participation. And as I said in the synopsis, I think mediated participation is probably an essential element in minority participation. And of course, we are talking about how ethno-racial minorities are often marginalized or minoritized, right, from the mainstream, okay? And often at times, of course, intersectionally, right? Because they are racial minorities, because they are ethnic minorities, they are often pushed, you know, to the fringe. And you're also talking about class here. So that's also the kind of source, you know, of their marginalization, but also the source of their agency too. So I guess, you know, this is the kind of, you know, the kind of backbone or the base I want to start with. And this book, I wanted to tease out this notion by talking about the extent of the rationale, the mode, the narrative, and the extent of this, you know, minority participation. And also, you know, I tend to want to say tactical, because this kind of participation is definitely tactical. Yeah. And as you know, the ethnic minorities were trying to, you know, voice out through the media, the use of different kinds of media to voice out, but also to gain more recognition. So anyway, as I have demonstrated in the different chapters, this kind of participation, like in chapter 4, I was talking about how, the case of Minority Initiative, Hong Kong, this Facebook page has been documenting their activities by way of speaking out. Chapter 5 is about some ethnic minority groups making use of, this public service broadcaster to produce programs in which they, engage in different forms of, narratives, to voice out, but also seek, the kind of recognition and, recognition as, the Hong Konger. Chapter 6 is the chapter on stand-up comedy, in which I focus on the story of a stand-up comedian in Hong Kong, Vivek Mahbubani. And how he uses stand-up jokes, as a way to engage the audience through jokes, but then actually, getting the audience to laugh at their own misconceptions, at their own sort of, their own stereotypes. And then chapter 7 is about fashion, the fashion chapter, which is definitely, a demonstration of their talent, but also the kind of communities of practice, and the fashion show itself as a site where they can perform this kind of genuine cosmopolitan, almost like a global South kind of cosmopolitan. You see, this microcosm of so many different kinds of race and ethnicities gathering together and to celebrate the kind of talents they show. So, yeah. So do you want me to go on to talk about belonging, or? Yeah.
A little, yeah. I have to talk about belonging, and then I'll get to the next one.
Okay. And yeah, so as I said, I think from then on, my notion of belonging is, I think, Fran, you asked me once, how did I come about, I was just kind of, like just writing away. And then suddenly you looked at the word belonging. I was like, okay, it actually is formed from two words, be and long. And and then I was like, okay, it makes sense. Because, to be and to long is actually two different motion, right? But also, stemming from different, mentality, right? To be, not trying to, repeat Shakespeare here, but to be is very powerful, right? It's like I am, I am, therefore I am. So to be is basically a way to voice out, to like, look here, I'm who I am. It's like, it's a way of like, of course, against the majority, right? For the minorities, like, so look at me, I am one of you, but I'm of a different color. But then, it's also to long, because, it's also about, to long for that identification, to long for the kind of inclusion, that the desire, right? To form that desire that I am part of you. So I thought that's really powerful. If we can kind of hyphenate it to actually separate those two words, like actually belonging consists of two powerful energies here. And visually, I think, by putting a little hyphen there, it also reminds us that this struggle for belonging is a process. It's a process that actually should invoke dialogue. It should invoke interaction, because it takes two to tango, between the majority and the minority. So I thought, it's a smart way to do it. And same as the other word, recognition, which we might get at, later on, right? But I like to also show you, to talk people through this idea of, how these different chapters actually speak, to this notion of belonging. If you can allow me to share screen here. So yeah, so maybe allow me to just go through a little bit of a chapter by chapter. So for me, belonging is demonstrated in different ways, and it also hopes to demonstrate the kind of ambivalence and also the dynamics involved in this kind of be and long. And in chapter 4, as I said just now, it's about I hope you can see. Yep. So these are photos that I took, when I was participating in one of their annual activities by this group called the Minority Initiatives. This is a group formed from 67 mostly South Asian youths in Hong Kong, but there's also 1 or 2 Filipinos, I think. They also set up this Facebook page, as you see in the tiny little page, on this right-hand corner, and in which they basically, tell people of their activities, but also, write extensively about what they think, and calling people to support. So basically, this kind of annual event that they organize is a kind of charity event in which they do every Chinese New Year ever since, I think, 2017, in which, on the first day of the Lunar Chinese New Year, they would go to, to deliver breakfast. I mean, that was, you can see, that was pre-COVID times. Okay, that this photo was taken in early 2018, I think, 2017, 2018. When I and they call it the breakfast giving kind of event. At early as 7:30 in the morning, they all they congregate and give out breakfast to the homeless, to the street sleepers. And this photo on the left, is taken underneath a flyover, where a lot of homeless people reside. And and so they posted these photos onto Facebook as a way of document their activity. But of course, I think the message here, they also post a message like, here we are under the flyover, we give out these breakfasts, and on the first day of Lunar New Year, when all the Chinese families are busy, with their extended families, here we are, we give out breakfast to the homeless, the Chinese, the South Asian homeless people. And so, it's our way to contribute, to the society. And and of course, we are also Hong Kongers. This is what they post, onto the Facebook afterwards. Aiming to contribute to society, join us, support us, like us. So it's actually, it's very explicit, their way of trying to, articulate the message through these activities. And and so I would argue that, this is also a way to, of course, perform the kind of gifting, all right? The act of gifting breakfast, but also gifting to the wider, Hong Kong community. And of course, and this photo especially, I think, is a very powerful one, because, you can see it's a very multicultural presence, if not multiracial presence. There are some Africans, Pakistanis, Indians, Nepalese, Filipinos, and also some Caucasians, as you can see here. So it's almost like a performance of the kind of multiculturalism or cosmopolitanism that Hong Kong is and should be. But it also is a way of saying, hey, we are there, taking care of, the Chinese, who are often forgotten, by most other Chinese in Hong Kong. So that's my idea of, be and belonging. Like, we're here, we are part of you, but we are also shaming the Chinese, right? Whereas you're so busy with your own, families. Here we are taking care of, the lower, the lowliest in Hong Kong. So that's why, that chapter, in this chapter, the title is actually, we are more than you, or we are more you than you. Like, we're more of a Hong Konger than you. And of course, we are Hong Konger is often, the kind of message they post on the Facebook. So, I mean, I'll try to, be quick. Chapter 5, the kind of belonging takes quite a different turn because, because of this public service broadcaster called RTHK. If people are familiar with RTHK in Hong Kong, is our notion of public service broadcaster, even though, of course, the status now is a little bit tricky. But anyway, they have this theme called Community Involvement Broadcasting Service, in which, they try to realize the idea of community involvement. Like, they invite a lot of different groups, community groups, to produce their own program, radio program. And they also make it quite an important, factor to include ethnic minorities or racial minorities as producers of these radio programs. So of course, it's their way, it's a way of the public service broadcast to say, hey, we are concerned about the marginalized groups here in Hong Kong, and we want, need to use this platform as a way to spread the message of inclusion. So they, lo and behold, they attracted quite a few ethnic minority groups who continuously join, as producers. So this is one. The program is called Cultural Dim Sum. There's also others made by, this is made by Miss Jane, pictured here, who's Indian. And there are some made by Pakistanis, Nepalese, and also Filipinos, Thais, and then Africans. So it's actually attracted a lot of ethnic minority groups to produce their own program. And so you see a flurry of diverse narratives, how they try to engage the audience, their imagined audience. And of course, they imagine the audience to be not mainland, but Chinese Hong Kong audience, because it's a public broadcasting service. So as my book explained, some of the programs, they promote their own cultures, but also other programs, they say, they of course criticize, the kind of neglect of the government. They also talk about discrimination, the kind of low employment opportunities for the ethnic minority groups. So, I mean, in short, I was arguing that, they engage in diverse regimes of narratives, to talk back at the mainstream, while trying to, almost perform a desirable image of, multiculturalism, in which, these programs invite different, ethnicities to come on board, as interviewees. So this is chapter 5, and then chapter 6. Should be chapter 6. If people are familiar about Hong Kong, Vivek Mahbubani, himself a Sindhi, has become quite a public figure now, and of course, as an ambassador of Indian communities, as far as ethnic minority communities. So basically, in short, he would fill his comedy jokes with his own personal experience growing up. Of course, a lot of these experiences involves, stereotypes, how, oh, hi, I'm Indian. Hi, I'm Vivek. I'm Indian. And of course, I do IT. So he definitely engages and plays around a lot of stereotypes, how he was profiled by the police. He kept on being asked to produce his own ID card, and then turns it into jokes. And then you see, how, many of the audience are Hong Kong Chinese, they laugh their heads off. But then these jokes are also pointing at, the Chinese majority too. So, and then the last one is a Harmony fashion show, which is organized by a group of, again, ethnic and racial minorities. This is the core group. This African woman called Harmony, it's actually her nickname, is the main organizer. She starts off as a refugee originated from Congo. And she aspires to become a fashion model. But then, of course, she just faced the array of this kind of, white privilege, in the whole fashion industry. Basically, she was denied, a lot of opportunities to model. So, out of frustration, she decided, and she's determined to do her own modeling company. So, I mean, she's been very active in organizing these fashion shows in which she invites, women and practitioners from various sectors to be the models. So you can see in this photo, these are all local Hong Kongers, Pakistani, an Indian, a Nepalese. And so they will go on the catwalk. And then the show turns out to be a microcosm, a multicultural microcosm, in which she also invites hip hop musicians, jazz artists, dancers, who are all from different ethnic minority groups. So it's really fascinating. The fashion shows she organizes, and she's become very successful in that sense. And then you can see, the fashion show attracts, again, very multicultural audience. So you can see, the kind of, belonging. I hope to demonstrate the different positions and also the different tactics and narratives of, belonging through these different chapters. Sorry, I was running on for a bit.
That's okay. That's terrific. Thank you, Lisa. Would you like to unshare your screen, or do you have more visuals? Okay. It's wonderful to see the color photos from the fieldwork there. It's absolutely fascinating. Really brings things to a further dimension of life, I guess. I do want to ask you next, as you intuited I might, about this other concept, majority recognition, right? So this is a concept that comes to the fore most strongly in the final chapters of the book, thinking about the potential for, how can the majority respond to this belonging and this tactical participation on the part of minority subjects. And I guess it's one of the ultimate goals of the forms of expression that you focus on, that you've just been speaking about, is majority re/cognition. So I wonder if you could discuss this term a little bit. That is, what do you mean by the term with that hyphen? And what are the prospects and hopes for the future, even perhaps in new developments since you completed the book? I mean, the final chapter discusses sort of future prospects, but I just wondered if anything new has come up since its publication last year. Thanks.
Okay, right. Yes. I think the term to unpack, and I promise to be brief here. Of course, the other side of the story, of course, is about recognition. Okay, all these efforts and initiatives recognized by the mainstream, right? And to what extent? And I think, as I said just now, so thinking about this question about recognition, I want to tweak it a bit to, again, sort of unpack this word recognition to recognition. The reason why I do that is that I think it's not just about, recognition, but actually causing, the mainstream or the majority others to rethink about their own position. And I think that might be even more important than just recognition. So that's why I thought it's worthwhile unpacking that. I mean, yeah, I also have to confess that it takes a long time, I guess, to actually achieve more recognition, so to speak, as we all know, right? And here I also want to thank Tanya Dreher, who had these wonderful projects about listening, right? And of course, I think it also sort of resonates with the idea about recognition. And but then I also just to cut a long story short, and I'm happy to continue on talking more about recognition, is that it's still, I mean, after all, these are pockets of ethnic minority youth initiatives, and of course one would question, oh, actually, does the mainstream hear, or how much has the mainstream heard? I mean, as you can see, a lot of times it's about what you can see as echo chamber effect, right? It's actually preaching to the converted, because of course, these groups, as they publicize their messages on social media or even on YouTube or other social media pages, it's actually a limited sort of audience, right? I mean, not echoing too much, media scholars here, that every single web page is basically a cottage. That's Leung's word. Little cottages, right? So I have to say that solely by judging the efforts of how effective these four groups have been, it's limited. Although Vivek and Jeff, who's one of the group members of the Minority Initiative, went on a more public path. If people are interested, I can share more about it later. But then for the others, it's still, I use the word closeted. It's a very closeted kind of participation, but also recognition. Even in the for the RTHK programs, even if it's broadcasting, still not too many people actually heard about these programs or listened to these programs. But anyway, my idea about recognition might be best demonstrated in chapter 4. What I meant by recognition. If you recall those photos I shared, it definitely, those breakfast giving events attracted a lot of different groups, ethnic and racial groups, and I did a few interviews with the participants, and I found a lot of recognition where these different ethnic groups actually started to rethink their own position. Like I was talking to a Pakistani girl, talking the event. She was saying, "Oh, I didn't really know that there are so many poor Chinese people," because she thought that Hong Kong Chinese people are all very rich and well-to-do, and it was a shock to her to find that there are so many homeless people, Hong Kong Chinese homeless people, and then of course in the kind of sense of empathy that goes with it, the kind of almost empathy towards the majority Chinese. I was also talking to some Caucasian participants. Some of them were saying that I was suddenly realizing that I'm also an ethnic minority group here in Hong Kong. because of course, he being placed with a lot of different, ethnic minority groups actually make them rethink about their own position, and of course, we often work from the notion of white privilege. White people often, sort of tend to be given positive stereotypes, but then in these sites, in these spaces, they suddenly sort of found themselves standing together on the same level as all other, minorities, and so these are just some snippets, snippets of the kind of recognition that could happen, in these different sites of, multiculturalism. So yeah, I'll just be brief here, because I'm also aware of the time.
Yeah, I've got two more questions. What do we do? Because we want to leave time for a discussion. Why don't I just put them both out there and you answer as you like, but we'll leave, enough time for discussion. Okay. So maybe super brief. And you don't, I mean, if you just want to say you don't want to deal with one of them, and someone can ask if the people here are particularly keen to hear that one that you're not speaking to, then you can do it, so you choose.
Okay, I do a lot.
Yeah, one of them is about the methodology for the project, and how you conducted the field work and how that felt for you, like whether it impacted for you personally, and maybe also on your sense of yourself as a participant in Hong Kong culture, as you've discussed a little bit earlier, and whether there might be a particularly memorable story you would like to share. That's one. Sorry, they're both enormous and we can't get through them both, but I'll ask the other one anyway. The other one is oh my God, there are three more. The other one was about the relationship between the minority young people's cultural and political struggles on their, in their own right, and then their participation in the wider struggle of Hong Kong people for self-determination in the context of the protests against the amendment of Hong Kong's extradition law. They were involved in those protests, and I think it's just a fascinating nexus that they're doing two kinds of work, two kinds of activism, if you like, and I think it's a complex relation, so that could be interesting to discuss. The final one was about how this book speaks to cultural studies as a transnational, disciplinary or non-disciplinary formation, and how it speaks to the Inter-Asia project. So there's no way we can get through all of those, and I don't mean to be greedy, but you pick one maybe, and then we'll move to other people's questions. And even if you pick one, let's do a quick answer, and we can maybe explore it further with the other participants who are here.
Yeah. Wow. All in one answer. If I could maybe share screen too. I'll try to. I really try to be quick, because I really look forward to people's questions. But then I think I'll just do a bit. Okay, I'll say a bit. I'll say a bit of all the three questions, and hopefully people could take on and we could elaborate on that. I mean, the methodological moment. It's $1 million question, on which I, as I confessed to you earlier, Fran. It's you just keep on doing the things that we do, as researchers, that we kind of end up not really thinking too hard about it. But of course, this kind of research, or this kind of topic really begs a flurry of diverse methods, right, and methodologies. I mean, you have to do a lot of textual analysis, you do a lot of data search, you do a lot of interviews, and then you have to do a lot of participant observation. You have to immerse yourself in those sites. And I have to say, I think I'm really blessed that this kind of research really took me to different corners in Hong Kong, which I never dreamt of, sort of visiting. And because of that, I often find myself sort of immersing in very foreign environments in which I find myself as the other. Like, so so how to situate yourself as a researcher in those sites, you know, it's often what I, you know, was facing. I mean, like these two photographs are sort of more controllable. Like, you know, I organize these interviews, and then I try to be friendly. I try to chit chat, and you know, not like asking questions 1, 2, 3, 4, but actually involve people in conversations. But then, of course, a lot of times, you know, I have to have a, you know, a translator, an interpreter, because I don't speak, you know, I don't speak Nepali, I don't speak Urdu or Hindi, and these are the moments that why didn't I learn? Why wasn't I could have provided such a kind of education? And then the one on the left is certainly a very trying moment. Like, you know, I just find myself in you know, we're in a room that are completely, you know, I was the only Chinese there, and people are speaking in their own languages, and you just stand there and, you know, okay, I'm supposed to do participant observation, whatever, how many questions you have prepared yourself beforehand, just kind of went in, became vapor, you know, like none of that, because you can't really make sense of what's happening. And then it really is a quick, you know, sort of, rejigging, rethinking. So you have to sort of act on the go and be flexible and try to find, you know, find tactics, you know, to involve yourself, you know, to sit next to, you know, someone who you think looks friendlier. And so, I mean, I could go on forever, you know, these really, you know, predicaments that I found myself in. But then you just kind of, you know, sort of grow with it and along with it. And so that puts me into the next question. As I said, you know, at the start, yes, there was kind of, you know, some accidental moments even. These are the happy moments at the time when, you know, yeah, you see the ethnic minority groups are really, you know, sort of passionate about, you know, the movements. And as you know, this was the 2019, you know, movement, and there was this very famous incident, this action where, you know, yeah, some ethnic minority groups organized what I call a water gifting event. Because in support of, you know, the protesters, as we, you know, sort of protested against, you know, the stipulation of the ELAB, you know, extradition law. Anyway, yeah, so that is definitely a moment of, you know, where which basically demonstrates how, you know, the, you know, struggle of ethnic minorities for rights, you know, for inclusion, actually is part and parcel of the kind of democracy that we are actually aiming for, and how that just comes so smoothly together. And I think, you know, the using of water, giving out water bottles is such a, you know, such a demonstration of the kind of fluid tactics that a lot of ethnic minority groups, you know, engage in. The kind of, yeah, I mean, it's so symbolic. I mean, water gifting, you know, water is so essential. Water is a, you know, essential element in life, and in particular occasions such as a protest. And how, you know, Be Water, of course, engaged with, you know, our, you know, kung fu martial arts hero Bruce Lee, you know, Be Water, right? So it's such a, you know, smart engagement, pulling in, you know, popular, you know, popular, you know, culture with, you know, the kind of message that we have to be water. And then that brings me to the last question of how, you know, this project could be, you know, imagined in a wider iteration context. I think, you know, these are definitely moments very unique to Hong Kong. I mean, the Hong Kong context is quite unique, but then it also shares a lot of commonalities with neighboring Asian states. I mean, as my book has been discussing. I mean, we had shared British colonial past, which of course, was catalyst in bringing, forging migration, intentionally and unintentionally, migration of Asians across Asia. We share colonial past. We also demographically, we also share with, locales where, there's a dominant cultural majority, there's a dominant ethnic majority, which of course adds the problem of minoritization or racial marginalization. And I think thirdly, as a lot of Asian states are increasingly becoming authoritarian, I think, these are the stories that we might want to share, as a way to see how, politically, we can also be minoritized. So I guess I'll leave it there.
Terrific. That was amazing. That was such a speed response to those 3 compressed questions. Thanks, Lisa. And now we have time to open up for further question and discussion. And I know there's already 1 or more questions in the chat. So Shmuel, are you here? Would you like to ask your question yourself, or would you like Lisa to answer it based on the written question?
Okay, I will ask in myself, okay?
Yeah, okay. Okay, go.
Yeah, I want to ask what social, economic, and political status of ethnic minorities in China's Hong Kong, of today. And second part of my question, how exactly official authorities of Hong Kong supporting integration of ethnic minorities in the society of Hong Kong, in the life of Hong Kong?
Okay, I think yeah, that's clear enough, and thanks, Shmuel. I believe I've seen you in other workshops, so thank you for your interest. Just to cut a long answer short, I forgot to mention the basic statistics, right? I mean, what I mean by South Asians refers to Indians, Pakistanis, and Nepalese here in Hong Kong, and I mean demographically they are definitely minorities. And I mean, of course, in Hong Kong, there are other, ethnic minority groups too. I mean, like the Japanese, the Koreans, Southeast Asians, the Thais, the Indonesians, Filipinos, and of course the European and American, races. But then I was focusing on South Asians simply because they historically they have been in Hong Kong for ever since the start of British colonization, and that's hence the problems. So if you're just talking about those 3 ethnicities, the Indians, the Pakistanis, and the Nepalese, altogether they only constitute 1% of Hong Kong population, being 7 million. So they are numerically definitely a minority group. So I think this also kind of makes the problem more serious and easily sort of discarded as the minor minorities too. I mean, throughout the years, and that's also could be the reason why they have been neglected, by Hong Kong government for many years. And in terms of lack of policies, lack of recognition of the kind of resources that they need, the kind of assimilationist attitude that a lot of government adopts, like, okay, well, since no one asked you to come here, so you're supposed to learn our language, and in schools, only Chinese and English are offered as, sort of medium of instruction. And so, a lot of the South Asian youth grew up being, either being forced to learn the language, or there is a time when they have these designated schools in which, okay, in order to economize resources, let's put them in some schools. And then you find that, there's basically, racial and ethnic segregation, where, a lot of the ethnic minority school children end up not knowing enough Chinese. But then you also find that, university requirements require everyone to have a certain level, to have attained a certain level of Chinese language. So it immediately becomes a ceiling, for ethnic minority youth to be able to enter into universities. And then, of course, you're talking about economic, marginalization. And of course, cross-generational, marginalization. And then of course, it's you're also talking about everyday kind of discrimination, where to date, still you come across a lot of South Asian residents, being shouted at, being given rude treatment, and and some actually said it seems that racial discrimination is getting worse. So yeah, and I think it also is about time that we start to discuss race, because race is like a word, almost like a tabooed word. Nobody talks about race, and then of course you come up with people saying, oh no, there's no racism in Hong Kong. And because no one talked about, no one uses the word about race, because they know that this is kind of like a dangerous territory to go into, especially given the resurgence of racist incidents around the world, and then you have got Black Lives Matter. So I guess I think it's really about time that we can raise the discussion of race in Hong Kong and other parts of Asia.
That's great. Well, I think we have a couple of questions, possibly from John. John, would you like to ask your questions?
Hi.
You were almost there, John. Turn on your mic again.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Right. But the host will not allow me to start my video. Okay, fine. Good. Lisa, good to see you. Good to see you, Fran. Congrats again on the book. You've covered a lot of ground. And I think Fran was, quite strategic in trying to point out some of the core concepts and ideas and that are in your book. I think that there's that one other concept that's lurking behind, and I'm trying to frame it in a way to see if you can respond to it. Obviously you write as a scholar, but very much the way you talk about racial injustice is as an advocate. And the book, that sentiment, that voice, that subjectivity kind of comes through a lot in the book, as in most of your work, which is wonderful. So why wouldn't you use the language, the political language of human rights in a subject like this for a book-length study on what has been vastly discussed in the world of minority rights, campaign minority rights advocacy? So that's not your language. I wonder if that's a conscious decision, or you just want to have a kind of human rights kind of a background, but without having to really kind of foreground it. I have another question about Vivek, but maybe you can just say a few words about that if you don't mind. Thank you.
Wow, thanks, John. Well, I could only say a few words. I think probably because of the fact that I don't think I master the language of human rights as you do. Like I definitely I think it's just kind of walking throughout the book. You know, it definitely is about human rights or the lack of in terms of inequality and injustice. And you and I both, know that I come from this advocacy background that focuses on injustice as is, right? Like naturally, of course, we have to face and counteract injustice. So yes, of course, and thanks for reminding that, of course, that I need to engage in more, human rights discussion and to be able to, further link with, international scholarship. But I guess like, our earlier book, I think I'll maybe for myself, want to take it in layers. And I think this book came out also because of the many stories that I collected throughout this 10 years, to the point where I thought, maybe I should, sort of engage in those stories first, and to further articulate the kind of agency at a critical juncture in Hong Kong. And little did I know that, this book kind of fell into, this the protest, right, in 2019, which I, sort of focused and featured in my conclusion. So yeah, and I thought, maybe it's also, a language that I'm more comfortable with, to focus on the stories and the human beings behind that as the main axis of the book, rather to turn into a very sort of academicized project. I hope I have answered your question.
Well, I mean, it's very interesting, but it's going to be a very long conversation to talk about the fit and the unfit spaces between advocacy and human rights work, which is very legal based and very state oriented. So I mean, there's a lot of contradictions there. But Fran, may I ask a second question, or?
Yes, you may. We have no more as far as I can see in the chat. So please go ahead, John.
Okay. Thank you. A slightly lighter question about Vivek, about V. It's this stand-up comedian who constitutes one of your chapters. I'm speaking here both as a friend, but also as a former collaborator on your first book. In the first book that we wrote and published in 2014, we featured another very well-known public entertainer at the time, that was Kibobo. Kibobo constituted a major section in one of our chapters. For those of you here, just 2 words about Kibobo. Is also a comedian. He came on the scene earlier than Vivek. Has been doing movies and television shows. Kibobo has almost 2 lives. One is on screen, almost always acting as a kind of buffoon character of a minority Indian guy who speaks perfect Cantonese, but who's always fumbling and all that. But on the other hand, in his real life, he's a real advocate. He goes into communities, various sorts of communities, doing very much this kind of same thing that you showed in your other chapters, to talk about both integration issues, but also the lack of it, right? And the injustices. So a bit of an activist on the side. A few years later, when you conceptualize your second book, you turn to Vivek. Now, Vivek, the work of a comedian is very different from Kibobo, who plays fictional characters, right? And so I don't know if you've thought about some sort of change of time, change of circumstances, change of situations over the years for someone as public as they are. I mean, for those of you who don't live in Hong Kong, any type of public, visible, non-Chinese entertainer over the last 20 years or so, you only can name 2 people, and that's it. I mean, that's it. I mean, it's so peculiar and so perverse, as Fran put it. But do you see any contrast? Do you see any kind of contextual transformations that might have taken place between an older Indian comic who only plays a fictionalized kind of buffoon, and a younger, more activist-like stand-up comedian who can speak directly to his audience, you know, in situ, right? Anyway.
Yeah, it's a good question, and yeah, and I think I was not, sort of consciously pushing off or Cubobo, not mentioning Cubobo, but it will definitely be a yeah, it will be a very interesting kind of contrast, if I included it in the book. I guess I think I was yeah, trying to like avoid the collapse almost. Because we talked extensively in the first book about Cubobo's case, which yes, he's definitely someone who's tactically negotiated, especially have the courage to negotiate with mainstream media, because he participated in this talent contest. Yeah, by organized by TVB, which, yeah, I think people are vaguely familiar with Hong Kong would know what TVB is, and which also came to be criticized for being a daitor, the very monopolized TV station, which never thinks about any changes, any alternatives, any creative ideas. So yeah, and you see how Cubobo has got two lives, like what you said, negotiating with the mainstream, really trying to get himself known, and hence all the singing or acting in crime movies, or either crime movies or comedies. But then he also has, he also takes advantage of his celebrity-ness to, benefit his fellow folks, including he manages his own talent company, right? Trying to encourage and benefit ethnic minority youths who might want to venture into the mainstream media industry. And then you have got, Vivek here, who's very different in terms of the kind of, the kind of statute. And I mean, Vivek comes from a more middle-class family. Hence, he's into, he was put in Chinese mainstream school, and then actually quite a privileged school. And then, he ended up being an IT person. He's definitely multi-talented. So in short, you're talking about the course of almost 8 years. Definitely the context has changed. I mean, the political context has changed, which I guess, Vivek is definitely smart enough to take advantage of the spaces, as I guess, also, the rise of stand-up comedy. But of course, you and I both know stand-up comedies are quite a separate habitus, to quote from Bourdieu. So the space from the space which he works on, right? And of course, the style, his style is very different from the kind of comedy or comedian style that Cubobo is in. So I think I would rather focus on Vivek. Although it was not intentional, but I wanted to bring out the kind of the very rich tactics, by way of talking about stand-up comedy as itself, linking with international scholarship on stand-up comedy, and of course the racial comedians who wages racial jokes, as a way to, talk back and shame the mainstream. So I thought, maybe it's also an administrative idea, to maybe pack that into a chapter rather than to further complicate the discussion. but this is definitely a worth re-looking at.
No, I guess they're just different discourse spaces, aren't there?
Yeah.
For the type of things that you want to talk about, and
Yeah.
And they're different historical contexts. If I can just use the word niche, I think a lot of your examples, your illustrations in your new book, is what I would consider niche participation, niche forms of participation. I mean, this audience is very niche, younger, right? Perhaps more angry, perhaps smarter. Kibobo wants to appeal to the mainstream, older audience who watch television. I mean, who watches TVB anymore, other than the older generation of Hong Kong people. Your fashion show that takes place in Eaton Hotel, also quite a niche space, a liberal space that supports LGBT, but also racial minority work in that hotel. So I think that in a way, your book is so good at capturing a variety of different discourse spaces without having articulated as such. In some ways, that's the beauty of the book. So thank you again for this.
Thank you. I think I see a hand. Yeah.
We do. We have a hand from Jiatan. So Jiao, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
Hi. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Fred and John. Hi. Well, many congratulations to the book. I actually, in my class, I used the book, Lisa and John edited, about understanding South Asian. So I can really see using this new book as new material for my class. So thank you. So I actually have a question about gender. I'm sure you talk about it in your book. So I would like to ask maybe some behind the scene kind of experience when you're doing the field work. Because we all know that, in terms of media representation, like you usually see like men, like South Asian men, right? So I just wonder, as a female academic, when you do the field work, like how does, the dimension of gender play in? Thank you.
Thanks, Ja. That's another $1 million question, which will inspire me to write another book, because I think in the course of my research, as you mentioned, Ja, I tend to come across South Asian male more than female. Although, of course, there is a rising, group of, very feisty Indian, Pakistani, and Nepalese female, who managed to get into university because they're so smart, and I can see that there will be increasing, female participation. In fact, they are, in different ways. Those, there are some university students groups who are, still working in advocacy groups. They make their own social media pages, to talk about, I think minority affairs. And there are many Nepalese and Indian females who form into dance groups, trying to promote, their own dances. So, I mean, in terms of, the kind of arguments that I was trying to make, the participatory or the participation and the kind of performance they make, it's definitely, worthwhile looking into. But yeah, I have to also say that, I find, that many females, they tend to, refuse my interviews, or, they tend to be more sort of behind the scene. So which made me think, I really have to reach out more, to reach out to those groups, to really try to get a bigger picture and a deeper picture, to understand, to delve into the different ethnicities and the female in these different ethnicities. I mean, I also would like to say that through this book is that, we tend to lump, South Asians together, as I also did in this book. But then, I hope my book also puts forward, this focus that, they're not the same. Okay, they are very different ethnicities. And it's worthwhile looking into, the different ethnicities and their own different cultures and beliefs and values. So definitely, if we could work together on a gender project, it would be great.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I think unless there's any last questions, we're already slightly over time. So perhaps you would all like to join me in congratulating Lisa on the amazing achievement of this book, albeit it came out last year. Last year, in my view, almost didn't exist because of all the COVID craziness. So well done, Lisa. Congratulations. Now it's properly launched and it's really existing in the world.
Okay, well, thank you very much, really. This means a lot to me. And I hope, this book can, attract you to have a look and buy. And as this book was intended for to reach a wider audience, so that anyone who's interested in such a line of research, or just simply to read about these amazing stories of amazing human beings, please, and as always, I would welcome your comments and questions. My email, Fran's email. Just feel free to drop me a few questions.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I guess, thanks everyone. Thanks especially to Holly for all of the behind the scenes and front of scenes at the start labor on this event. It's been great. I've enjoyed myself, and thanks again, Lisa, for inviting me. And thanks everyone for the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Fran. You really made it. Made my day.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Okay, but thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day and a good life.